Now, after the plea deal reached by investigators looking into possible collusion between then-candidate Trump and the Russian government and Michael Flynn, as well as the inquiries into Jared Kushner, Donald Trump Jr., and the rest of Trump's network of people in the White House, well, these people are walking around with an eye on each other. They appear to be very paranoid and very, very worried that they are also being recorded. Now, according to Politico, paranoia has enveloped the White House and President Trump's network of former aides and associates as Robert Mueller's probe heats up. Now, former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, they write, agreed to cooperate with investigators as part of the plea deal he reached last week, adding to the worry already inside Trump's circle surrounding the secret deal struck earlier this summer by former campaign aide George Papadopoulos, whose cooperation was kept quiet for months before being unsealed in late October. Now, of course, they find that out like, oh my God, Papadopoulos pled guilty back in the summer. And we didn't know until October. Wait, what did he get in return for that plea deal? Oh my God, were we being recorded? That is the problem here. Now, both cases, Politico writes, raise the possibility that other current or former colleagues have also flipped sides and that they're prompting anxiety that those people could be wearing wires to secretly tape record conversations. One staffer close to Trump's White House, one person close to Trump's White House said, quote, everyone is paranoid. Everyone thinks they're being recorded. Interesting. Now, look, there might be a good basis for that paranoia, but ultimately, I'm going to point out how they shouldn't be quite as worried as they are. Politico notes that inside last week's 10-page plea deal, Flynn struck with the government prosecutors is an agreement that the former White House National Security Advisor could avoid a potential lengthy jail term in part by, quote, participating in covert law enforcement activities. So this is what's got a lot of people in the White House really worried, really concerned, like, wait a minute, covert law enforcement activities? Like, wearing a wire? Are you wearing a wire? I'm not wearing a wire. You wearing a wire? Everybody's wearing a wire. At least that's what they think. They actually believe that everybody around them could be wearing a wire. That's how paranoid now this entire investigation has people inside the White House. Now, Mueller and his team, of course, they're not saying anything. Why would they? They're consummate professionals. And if anything, Mueller is playing it 100% by the book. Now, that book is actually very important because it actually sets out some rules on how you're able to use and record conversations. Now, White House attorneys and private counsel representing both current and former Trump aides told Politico that they immediately checked in with their clients once they learned about Mueller's plea agreements with Papadopoulos and Flynn, asking whether they'd had any communications with their former colleagues, which could have been secretly recorded while also reminding them to be diligent in avoiding conversations with anyone except their lawyer related to the Russia investigation. Now, one attorney who represents a senior Trump aide caught up in the Russia investigation said, quote, they're probably shitting bricks. How can you not? Well, as I'm going to go on to explain, there is a reason why I think a lot of people, and this is according to some experts as well, why they're actually going to be okay. Now, on that though, this guy's saying, oh my God, you should be incredibly worried about this whole thing. And how could you not be worried? How could you not be shitting a brick? Well, if you've done nothing wrong, for one, you have nothing to worry about. It's that same old right-wing trope. Oh, don't worry. See, it's the argument they use in favor of things like searching, like the program that they had in New York where they would go and they would just randomly search black people. Well, if you have nothing to hide, then you shouldn't be worried about that. That's stop and frisk. So, but wait. Why doesn't it apply to right-wingers? Why doesn't it apply to people in the White House? I mean, it should. If you have nothing to, if you've done nothing wrong, you have nothing to fear with people walking around with the wire. But nonetheless, they put out this warning. Now, here's the interesting thing. This plea deal is super important. I mean, Mueller wouldn't allow Flynn and Papadopoulos to plead down unless they had seriously good information. That doesn't necessarily mean that they would be wearing wire. It would just mean that they had good information. But again, there are people that are concerned that, what if it's both? What if they're spying on Kushner, or what if they're spying on Trump? Well, again, they can't do that because there are certain rules that protect people under investigation from being recorded. I know that sounds strange, but according to Politico, special counsel is not supposed to wire up a witness to talk with a person who he knows already has a lawyer representing them on the subject matter that is being discussed on the tape. That includes conversations covering details of a joint legal defense strategy. And then you have Trump's lawyer, Ty Cobb, weighing in as well, saying, quote, Mueller is too good a professional and too good a prosecutor to tape represented individuals, and he doesn't want his office or his important mission to be tainted. He even told people in the White House, hey man, you've got nothing to fear. Cobb said, I don't know anyone who feels that paranoia. To the uninformed and inexperienced, this may be enjoyable, but in reality, it is unhinged speculation with no foundation. Now that is, of course, Trump's lawyer, Cobb. But legally, he actually is correct to a point. So right now he's saying, hey, guys, you don't got to be worried about that. There are protections that make sure that they can't go and wire someone up to talk about Russia. So that's fine. You still shouldn't talk about Russia, but nonetheless, you are protected. And look, the other thing is that Mueller is going to get jumped on, or he's already getting jumped on and piled on by the right wing, who are looking for any excuse to try to destroy his credibility. So you destroy the credibility of the investigator, you make him seem like he's biased or whatever, and then you give them grounds to fire him. You give Trump grounds to fire him without political recourse. So that's what they're trying to do. Now, for example, Newt Gingrich, right? He's one of the guys that jumped on. He told the Washington Post shortly after Papadopoulos, his plea deal, back in October that Congress should, quote, look seriously at whether Mueller put a wire in this guy and sent him around to entrap people, because if he did, that would cast some serious doubts on this investigation. Mueller's office must follow the same guidelines as U.S. attorneys and others at the Justice Department use when considering whether to wire up a cooperating witness. So that sort of explains why in all of these different cases, Manafort, Gates, Flynn, they go after things like financial crimes instead of actually going to whether or not they colluded with Russian officials. Now, if they tried to entrap someone who was already lawyered up about that one issue, then it would cause a lot of problems. So in the end, he has to be very, very careful. Now, that said, there should be some cause for concern because Mueller's hands aren't completely tied when it comes to this issue. In fact, you had former Watergate prosecutor Nick Ackerman saying that Mueller is on solid ground with ample court precedent to use witnesses wearing wires with anyone who isn't known to have a lawyer. And he said the special counsel also has plenty of room to use the technique with people who do have lawyers. He said, quote, otherwise the government would never be able to use body wires against career criminals like members of the mafia who always have lawyers. That makes all the sense in the world. Yes, you would have to have some sort of vehicle for prosecutors to be able to go after people who have lawyered up, but also that it also makes sense for people who are facing investigation to be able to have some sort of protections as well against people wearing wires. So it's a balancing act. So this is what's going on there. Now, defense attorneys, they rarely succeed in getting tape-recorded conversations thrown out in court, he added, which is also very important, because the cooperator can still testify about what the person told him. The tape recording ensures that what the jury hears of the conversation is actually what happened, so it's more used, instead of proof, it's more verification. Now, asked about Cobb's advice to the White House that it shouldn't fret about colleagues wearing wires, Ackerman replied, quote, that's good. Let them think that. I love that. Now look, the truth of the whole thing is that this entire case is extremely politicized by both sides. And it seems very obvious it is the president. And the Trump team, they're watching Mueller like a hawk. They're waiting for him to make a mistake. They're waiting for some sort of impropriety in order to gain in order to discredit them and say that, oh, look there, see, it was actually a witch hunt. They were going after Trump. It was all purely political. So they're just, like I said, they're just waiting for him to mess up. Now, it's very unlikely, since Mueller is going by the book and he is a professional, that he would actually do that. Now, so there are people that are convinced that Flynn and Papadopoulos aren't actually the people that were worth wiring up. So there is that thing that, like, hey man, why would you wire Flynn? Why would you wire Papadopoulos? Especially after you know that everybody's been lawyered up anyway. In fact, by the time Papadopoulos was arrested in July, Mueller had already been appointed, and many of the people who had been named as potential targets had already hired lawyers who would have flagged the concern about meeting former colleagues wearing wires. So that's the other argument against this. Now, Flynn knew that he'd be under scrutiny back from January, when he was forced out of the White House for lying to Mike Pence. Then he already knew he was a person of interest, so immediately like, yeah, let's get a wire. Quote, it's tough waters to navigate, this is according to a federal prosecutor tracking the Russia case, it's tough waters to navigate from a investigator point of view to put a spy in the camp at this juncture when everybody is represented by counsel. It's doable, it's just very tricky and probably not very productive. I think everyone is treating everyone else as if they're radioactive. So, now, that's an incredibly good point. So it wouldn't have made sense to wire Flynn. It wouldn't have made sense to wire Papadopoulos. Because, again, at this point, as soon as Mueller was appointed, everybody's like, oh shit, this shit's going to hit the fan. Let's go and get lawyers. Let's protect ourselves against people wearing wires. That makes sense. Now, so there's that. And I think the other reason that staffers are so paranoid is because of the environment, right? The environment fostered by President Trump. Remember, it starts at the top. I mean, there are plenty of stories that came out earlier in the beginning of the year where you had cutthroat competition, you had people backstabbing each other, jockeying for position. That's a real thing. It's been reported on the administration. You just add in the idea that somebody could theoretically be wearing a wire. Add that into the toxic stew that we already have inside the White House, and it just increases the paranoia that is already there. And nobody trusts each other anyway, and you add this extra element of distrust, and this is what you're going to get. Now, whether it's baseless or not, I don't know. I don't know if anybody has worn a wire. Obviously, Mueller's not going to come out for it and say it. And I see, again, in the cases of Flynn, Manafort, and Papadopoulos, you didn't need a wire to get to them. All you had to do was just follow the money. I think in the rest of the cases, the cases like Donald Jr., for example, Donald Jr., you definitely don't need anyone to wear a wire because he's not a smart person. You don't need anybody to wear a wire around Trump. He's not a smart person. He will tell you that he is obstructed. He'll do it over Twitter, not knowing what he's actually doing. So, that said, again, you've got all these people that are scared in the White House that believe that, hey, man, they're coming after us, the deep state, everybody's coming after us. Are you wearing a wire? I don't know. Are you wearing a wire? I'm not wearing a wire. Are you wearing a wire? All that is just enough to scare the shit out of so many people in the White House. And I guess at the end of the day, in my personal opinion, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent progressive media, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/TYTNation.